At the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union lay exhausted and bleeding. But Stalin had emerged triumphant, and to celebrate his victory, he ordered a series of grandiose construction projects. Among them was a vast new railway line stretching across the Arctic Circle. Called the Great Stalin Railway, it consumed huge quantities of raw materials, equipment, and lives. Hundreds of thousands of slave laborers were used to build it. 2,000 miles northeast of Moscow, all that remains of this grand design are rotting sleepers and twisted rails. The Great Stalin Railway lives on only in the memory of those who survived.
Всю радость жизни, все, что называется жизнью, это не жизнь, это хуже, чем существование. У меня нет слов на это, что я потерял. Все буквально.
All human emotions, love, friendship, envy, mercy, honesty, fell away from us along with the meat of our muscles. We had no pride, no vanity. Even jealousy and passion seemed to be Martian concepts. The only thing left was anger, the most enduring of human emotions.
By 1948, Stalin's grip on Russian society was total. For 20 years, he had millions of his fellow citizens arrested and shipped off to the Gulag, anyone thought to be the slightest challenge. The war had forced Stalin to relax his pressure, but another round of purges began soon after. The Great Stalin Railway was to stretch east from the Urals, running parallel to the Arctic Sea. The official reason for the project was strategic, to defend Russia's northern border. But others suspected a more sinister purpose, to link all the Gulag camps of the north. Officially, life in the Soviet Union was peaceful and the people happy. The Communist Party had freed the workers from capitalism, portraying them riding to battle on the symbol of Soviet industrial dominance, the steam engine.
Победили мы! Прочно! Навсегда! Мы, чумазые, некогда рабы капитала, рабы помещиков, стали нынче хозяевами великой железнодорожной державы, навсегда победоносна! Конструктора этого теплопаровоза выразили свои чаяния назвать этот паровоз Сталинец.
Georgy Biankin, an ethnic Russian, was arrested when Soviet troops invaded China in 1945.
Днем меня арестовали, вечером я был уже, наверное, километров за 100 от Храбина, меня вывезли. Осталось, я только что женился, сыну был 6 дней, 7-й шел. С женой прожил я, значит, всего год. Осталась она и осталась мать. Больше жены я не видел, сына больше до сих пор, вот мне сейчас 75-й год уже идет, до сих пор я их ни разу больше не видел.
They took us north in crowded freight cars with narrow barred windows and triple-decker bunks, a makeshift toilet and a tiny stove that gave off a pitiful heat. They locked us in for days at a time with the criminals, the noise and the stench. We barely knew day from night because the trains never stopped.
Голод сопутствовал каждой минуте пребывания нашего в вагоне. Затем холод. И чем дальше мы ехали к северу, тем больше этот холод нас брал в тиски такие. Я говорю, что ощущение утром, когда ты просыпаешься, и ты примерз к нарам. Ты отдираешь себя от этих нар. Потом понемножку начались болезни. Начались поносы, которые перешли в кровавые поносы. Началась дизентерия среди этапа. Начали люди умирать.
Туалетов никаких не было в этих вагонах. Были на уровне вот так сантиметров 60-70 вырублены 2 вот таких окошка. Ну, такое, чтобы человек не мог пролезть, конечно. Вот. И досками обделаны. И вот когда, а все-таки там не 100 человек ехало, когда шли мочиться, то пар над вот этим отверстием, он весь таким инеем становился, мелким снегом. Так люди, понимаете, нечем было, скребли ногтями вот эту мерзлую мочу и пили. Вот это было очень и очень ужасное.
Who will describe the desperation of that forward motion separating men from their wives? After the Great War of the Fatherland, steel prongs were placed underneath the rear cars. If a prisoner managed to saw through the flooring and throw himself flat between the rails, the steel comb would grab him, tear him apart, and drop him under the wheels. For those who broke through the roof of the car and climbed out, there were searchlights whose dagger-like beams pierced the darkness from the locomotive to the end car. And a machine gun pointed the length of the train. And that machine gun knew what it was there for. Someone lifted a small lad up to the tiny window, and he shouted out, "Grandfather, grandfather, where are they taking us?" And everyone listened to the old man's long, drawn-out voice. "To Siberia, dear. to hard labor.
Когда мы приехали на место, у нас в тамбуре лежало уже 5 одервеневших, окаменевших трупов.
To build a railway in the Arctic was a colossal undertaking. Everything had to be shipped northwards thousands of miles during the few months when the rivers were free of ice. The prisoners were crammed by the thousand into the holds of river barges. Nikolai Mankovich, a decorated soldier, got 10 years for arguing with a political commissar.
Вот я как помню, я сидел где-то в середине, там только одно окно, и там вдали еще одно, сверху, с решетками. А здесь мы сидели прямо на полу в трюме. Ой, кормили такой пахнущей селедкой. Тут же выливали за борт, а передняя баржа тоже парашу выливала. А здесь воду мы черпали, у всех животы разболелись.
Alexander Snorsky, a young medical student, was accused of anti-Soviet agitation and given 10 years.
Ну, а так как люди были ослаблены, если, так сказать, опуститься на землю по малой нужде человеку очень легко, а по большой человек должен забраться на, вот, высота бочки, взобраться на бочку и балансировать на ее краю. Это, я не знаю, физически здоровому человеку очень трудно. Но вот человек пристраивался, он садился, очень часто он в этот момент, он терял равновесие. И вот, взмахнув рукой, он сшибал тех, кто бочки-то в ряд стояли. Их было не менее 5-6, никак не меньше. Это стоял ряд бочек. Вот, и он сбивал следующих. И этих людей уже на нары не пускали. Они были в нечистотах. И они уже жили вот тут, вот около этих параш, вот на первых нарах. Здесь они уже вот эти... Это были страшное дело, это были несчастные люди. Ну, а с другой стороны, вот я себе, так сказать, представляю, я себе периодически сам себе устраивал такой экзамен. Ну, опустил ли бы я этого несчастного человека рядом с собой на нары? И вы знаете, должен со стыдом сказать, я бы его тоже ведь не пустил. А вот эта баржа, вот тут впервые вот была эта стрессовая ситуация вот этого совершеннейшего обесценивания человеческой жизни. Вот можно сказать так. Это было первый раз я столкнулся, когда я убедился, что моя жизнь абсолютно ничего не стоит. Я никому не нужен. Я вот ноль, абсолютнейший ноль. Если меня не станет, это совершенно заурядное, обычное явление, мимо которого очень легко пройти.
In the autumn of 1949, when the first prisoners finally arrived at Yermakova, the tiny Arctic settlement which was to be the eastern terminus of the railway line, they found nothing. No roads, no barracks, no construction equipment. Only shovels, picks, and rolls of barbed wire.
Right now at Argos, there are hundreds and hundreds of new products at the most amazing prices. Personal stereos, cameras, jewellery, dining suites, Batman toys, microsystem shavers, CD-ROMs, watches, mobile phones, irons, hairdryers, sofas, baby bouncers, Action Men toys, Barbie skating gear and a whole lot more. To find out why they're going so fast, pick up the new Argos catalogue now. Argos takes care of it.
Pink? Coral pink? It's like a big pink blancmange.
59 caddy, a real Elvis job.
I wouldn't be seen dead in it.
It needs a bit of work, like, you know.
Tony, it's disgusting.
Dad said we'll have to buy a petrol station to go with this. I think he might be right.
I don't know where we've gone wrong with that lad.
I'm waiting till he tries to get parts for it.
There's this bloke in Cincinnati.
Hi, Kenny Daddy.
Yeah, all right, I'm after a rear tail light. I am, Elvis Jr.
Who was this Elvis bloke anyway?
Whatever you've set your heart on, make sure you've got MasterCard in your corner.
Gentlemen, this is a phenomenon. These pictures have been enhanced. Note this extraordinary object. It's got a powerful 16-valve engine and ABS. Look here, the name, highly unusual. And what is wrong with this picture? Precisely, air conditioning. This Desire costs just $13,990 on the road. It's one of 3 limited edition Xantias available now.
The Citroen Summer Phenomenon. Now there's something you don't see every year.
Unfortunately, we have no idea what this creature is.
What kind of science can take a fuel, burn it, and turn the ashes back into fresh fuel?
To burn again. A fuel formed in the hearts of giant stars, recreated from its own ashes. How?
Just as a prism separates light into its component colours,
these people can do this with matter.
but their prism is a bubble 0.1 millimeter thick.
They take burned up fuel and use it to make fresh fuel.
To burn again.
Of the 3% that's left over as waste, most is
cased in concrete and steel or turned to glass.
But this is not some distant galaxy, nor the far future. It's today.
Today, here in Britain, what looks like science fiction
is actually science. Developed by a British company, BNFL, in its work making and recycling nuclear fuel.
Work which provides thousands of skilled jobs.
To find out more, come to the Visitors Centre at Sellafield.
Where science never sleeps.
Argos has hundreds of new products like personal stereos, cameras, jewellery, dining suites, microsystem shavers, hairdryers, watches, toys, and a whole lot more. To find out why they're going so fast, pick up the new Argos catalogue now.
The Great Stalin Railway project was controlled by Moscow and built to Moscow's deadlines. The pressure to begin was so great that the engineers hadn't even finished surveying the route when the first prisoners arrived. Alexander Paborgy, a senior construction engineer, recalled in his memoirs,
I thought it would be easy to build the 800-mile railway, but my illusions were soon blown apart. Already everything was falling behind schedule. And there was so much time wasted in just getting the prisoners off the barges, giving them a head-to-toe search. The guards strolled about with their machine guns and barking dogs, setting out the zones with markers. The ground around the prisoners, with its permafrost, soon became a grey mass with mosquitoes flying over it.
Gennady Stroganov was given 7 years in the camps for a teenage prank, stealing a bottle of vodka.
Когда выгрузили и погнали по тундре прямо по колено в воде, по мох, ну болото, с болотом. Кто был в тундре, тот знает где-то. Пригнали там пригорок, место вот повыше. И больше ничего. 4 кола. Стройте себе ограждение. Стали забор строить, проволоку натянуть. Столбы закопали, проволоку приколотили. А сами так, кто как может, на голой земле.
После страшного этапа такого, естественно, что в просторной зоне, в чистом воздухе было какое-то облегчение. Это как праздник было. Но праздник быстро кончился. А на следующее утро звон рельса возвестил о начале рабочего дня. Ну вот, значит, строят колотушками, выравнивают, бьют, ставят, бьют, сколотили каре, вот, вывели за зону, повели на работу. Мы все после полутора месяцев голода и лишений отощали, конечно. Нам эту лопату так-то поднять трудно. А тут этой лопатой надо в течение 8 часов грузить мерзлый песок. Ну вот. Ну, уже через час, конечно, были руки в крови, потому что перчатки-то дали, но перчатки, ну что же, разве могут они спасти от этого? Вот, так что кровавые мозоли тут же лопаются, рвется кожа, из них сочится кровь. А куда денешься? Если остановишься, кричат, травят собаками. Ну вот. Ну вот так прошел первый день. Человек ко всему привыкает. Второй, третий, четвертый. Мы как-то втягивались в это дело.
Getting equipment into the interior was my biggest headache. Having horses, driven by prisoners, sex as they were called, drag supplies through the swamps was the only way. They live wild, their bodies eaten by the mosquitoes. The marshes ensured their clothes never dried out. The prisoners often slept in the trees because there were fewer mosquitoes and midges up there.
Как комар, этот меньше комара, вот такой, это ужас, что. Она же проникает куда хочешь. Мы же башхватами вот так вот закрывались. Все, чтобы не пускать ее, она пролезала. Это ужас. Это ужас. Потом уже кто что, вот что гораздо начал заматываться. А так она съедала, уши опухли.
The mosquitoes were a great distraction, and the guards had a special punishment to keep the Zeks working. A slacker would be stripped naked and tied to a wooden pole. Within a few minutes, his body would become a black mass of insects. If the experience didn't kill him, the unconscious prisoner would be dragged back to the camp at the end of the working day. The camps had no names, only numbers. There was one every 4 miles along the whole line.
Ведь на работу приводят, ставится тоже в табличке «рабочая зона». Но люди же живые, кому-то в туалет надо сходить. И был случай такой, что кто-то попросился там выйти за ту рабочую зону, чтобы поправиться. Только ушел туда, последовал выстрел. Нет человека. Таким образом, говорят, насколько верно, люди говорили, что некоторые конвоиры зарабатывали себе отпуска таким способом. Как бы убийство при попытке к бегству. Раз вышел за территорию рабочей зоны, считается. А сказать то, что бежать, по-моему, практически некуда было. На 1000 километров запретная зона. Лагерь на лагере, охрана на охране. Кормежка, хлеб и какая-то супишка там или кашка, это же не по труду и не по температуре. Постепенно слабеешь и слабеешь, начинает голова кружиться, слабость, покачивать тебя начинает уже, идешь и спотыкаешься. Надо поднять что-то, у тебя уже и силушки нет, еще выразиться, жаловаться некуда.
The larger men died first, whether or not they were accustomed to hard labor. A scrawny intellectual lasted longer than some country giant, if the two were fed on an equal basis with the standard camp ration. To eat better, one had to work better. But to work better, one had to eat better.
Человек, знаете, существо, конечно, довольно странное. Он любит о себе очень неплохо думать, хорошо думать. Думать о моральной, о духовной чистоте, о культуре, о цивилизации. Разрешите вас заверить, в таких экстремальных условиях человек, может быть, скажет, что не каждый, а я смею вас уверить, что большинство становится приматом. Единственное, чего мучит, это не просто голод, это галлюцинации. Голодным человек может быть день, может быть два, неделю человек не ел. Но когда месяцами не доедаете, когда голод вас уже проник до пяток, до самого мозга костей, я 174 метра ростом, 51 килограммов весил доходил. С меня с кожи вот так вот можно было перхоть сгребать. Сыпалось все.
My dreams assumed a cannibalistic, erotic form. Love and hunger returned to their common biological root, releasing from the depths of my subconscious images of women made of fresh dough, whom I would bite in fantastic orgies till they streamed with blood and milk, twining their arms, which smelt like fresh loaves, round my burning head. I would wake, exhausted and covered in sweat. The others slept the feverish sleep of those in pain.
Дважды доходил. И уже ничего больше. Ни отца, ни мать, ни детей, никакой жизни, никакой культуры, театра. Там, какой разговор, Господи, я за 10 лет ни одной книги не прочитал. Думаешь, только покушать. Вот я утром проснусь, если я освобожусь. Нет, я проснусь в 6, не в 6, я в 5 проснусь. Покушаю, потом посплю еще, опять еще, может, покушаю. А мысли, где я возьму, где я заработаю или что? Нет, сначала, значит, тут что покушаю. А что я покушаю? Я вот это покушаю. Нет, я еще вот это покушаю, вот это покушаю. И никаких деликатесов. Каких-то молоко, яйца, яблоки, фрукты. Мыслей не было. Хлеба побольше было. И хорошо, если бы он был свежий и белый.
Ah, yes, the machine grease. The barrel was immediately attacked by a crowd of starving men who knocked out the bottom with a stone. In their hunger, they believed the machine grease was butter sent by the Americans through Lend-Lease. And there remained less than half a barrel by the time a sentry drove off the crowd of starving, exhausted men with rifle shots. And everyone who had been lucky enough to touch the grease licked his fingers hours later. Nothing terrible happened to those who had dipped their hands in the barrel. Trained in the camps, stomachs and bowels proved themselves capable of coping with machine grease.
Мы-то чувствовали, что мы доходим. Мы слабеем. Казалось, уже слабеть-то некуда, а слабеем. И я по себе почувствовал просто, что во время движения этапа нашего, вот мы идем, 5 человек в ряд, колонна. Я чувствую, что я то в одну сторону меня качнет, то в другую. И я вдруг немножко теряю сознание. Я не отдаю себе отчета, где я, что я нахожусь. Несколько раз так было, я подумал, а не дай бог. Я могу свалиться или оступиться в сторону, так меня же просто пристрелят. Нас же предупреждают при каждом. Шаг вправо, шаг влево, считаем побегом. Просто очередь из автомата. Они вправе, они имеют право по закону это сделать.
I sat up slowly and looked at my feet, which were bursting out of my rubber shoes above the ankle. So it was true. One did swell from hunger. I unlaced my shoes, freeing my feet from the straps, and with difficulty I began to unpick the seams of my thickly padded trousers. Every movement was a piercing streak of pain, for I had to tear the cloth away with a crust of dried blood and pus. But I did not stop until I saw my 2 legs naked. Red blocks covered with open sores, from which a yellow pinkish fluid trickled slowly. To pull off my jerkin, I had to get down from the bunk, and when the whole operation was accomplished, I sat down on the floor, exhausted. Now I could swell freely. And without noticing it, I fell asleep, with my head on the cushions of my knees, soft and wet with blood. My head weighed on me like a ripe pumpkin. The sores on my legs had dried while I was asleep, but were itching so mercilessly that I began aimlessly to pick at them. I was stifling, and I felt my bladder burning again, but I had not the strength to get up. I felt a hot wave flowing through my trousers and saw a small puddle forming on the floor. How helpless. How bloody helpless.
Schizandra, guarana and lime flower. Schweppes Shazam. The golden colour, the intriguing aroma and the fresh fruity taste. Schweppes Shazam. Refresh your senses.
Now's the time to start filling in your tax return form. That way, if you get a bit lost, you'll have more time to get any help you might need from your tax office, who will be happy to steer you in the right direction.
Five-minute Just for Men.
Apply Just for Men and in 5 minutes rinse. Especially timed to blend. Only by P&O European Ferries. Now sailing up to 6 times daily. Jetliner from P&O European Ferries, Larne to Kenryan. The shortest, fastest crossing.
The grueling working conditions faced by the prisoners was of little concern to the camp authorities and construction engineers. They were acting on the direct orders of Stalin, and the supply of prisoners was virtually inexhaustible.
К лошади отношение, что со стороны начальства было, как начальник говорил, лошадь сдохнет, не дай бог, смотрите, мне за нее отвечать надо. У вас хоть 10 сдохнет, акт составим, спишем и все. Не за кого отвечать, не перед кем отвечать, вернее. У хорошего хозяина скотина в 10 раз лучше содержится у доброго хозяина, чем у начальства, у лагерного начальства содержится заключенный. Это такого, это нечеловеческое отношение просто само по себе. И безответственное абсолютно. А потом, может быть, и по спецзаданию. Чем быстрее, пришлют новых. Небольшие лагунты лесоповальные, 500 человек, 600 человек. Один контингент закончился, хорошо, через 3-4 месяца пришлют другой. Их вот так вот, сколько угодно, миллионы бесплатных рабов.
The project ran into immediate difficulties. Construction engineer Paborji.
Ground conditions in the Arctic proved almost impossible to work in. It was vitally important that we did not disturb the permafrost, otherwise all our work would slither and slide and collapse. On one hill we built a small village for the officers. Above it we dug a protective canal which damaged the permafrost. In the summer, the whole hillside began to move and all the buildings began to slide downwards. The bathhouse held the record. In 2 months it moved 100 meters.
Пилишь, а уже сил не хватает тянуть ее, пилу. Нет сил. Вот вы, если выдохли, что вы будете делать? Чтобы вам дали прикладом по попе? Так нет. Переворачиваешь пилу обратной стороной, чтобы она зубьями не скользила, а этим, обухом. А так сил не хватает. Просто не хватает, уже истощение полное. Там же надо питаться ой-ой-ой для того, чтобы работать.
On the telegraph and in the reports that came to me from all along the line, there were worrying signals. Constant reports of accidents, large and small. The foundations were too weak, having been built to a political deadline, not a construction engineer's requirements. The impact of the spring floods and the movement of the permafrost were everywhere to be seen. The sandbanks were melting away into the waters. The concrete foundations were vanishing into the marshes, and the railway line was sinking. Sleepers, rails, and sand were just disappearing.
На это я могу сказать только одно. Будучи нарядчиком, мне приходилось отправлять на работу людей, которые, может быть, в этот момент были достаточно ослаблены. Но не в оправдание, а для объективности должен сказать. Я подтасовывал бригады, которые уже устали, под нехватку конвоя, и мне удавалось их оставлять. Кроме того, ко мне можно было подойти и сказать, что я дошел, оставь в зоне. Этих людей я, как правило, оставлял. Конечно, слабым утешением было, что этих ослабленных людей на работу отправлял не я, а система. Но таким слабым утешением было, я себя утешал тем, что если б не я, нарядчиком был другой, более жестокий человек.
Парнишку прислали. Лет, наверное, ему, 19-20, не больше. Он начал терять силы. Чувствует, что все равно дойдет, конец ему будет. Он решил отрубить себе руку. И вот он, знаете, а у него, наколки у многих есть. Вот здесь такая наколка была выколота, звездочка, пятигранная звездочка, так красиво, так хорошо выколота. И он один раз все-таки рубашку снял, приготовил, все, положил руку, не знаю, или хотел он полиции, или он, может быть, так и хотел. Отрубил вот по это место. И так на пеньке, пенек лежал, так осталось. Пальцы зашевелились. Рука начала синее стала. Вот эта звездочка здесь ярко, видно было ее. Потом не стало.
Я не представлял, можно ли эту дорогу построить. Нас заставляли строить. Мы делали то, что нам говорили. А будет ли толк от этой дороги? Вот когда летом работали на отсыпке вот уже на передней части, когда там попадали вот эти, озера, не озера, какие-то окна такие водяные в тундре. И когда вечером насыпаешь 2 метра насыпь песка, а утром приходишь, там нет ничего, голая вода. Вот тут можно было и усомниться.
The system of command was another one of my headaches. In the camps, any order ever given, however outrageous and impossible the task, was always answered without the bat of an eyelid by, "Yes, sir, consider it done," even though everyone knew it would never be fulfilled. It was clear from the way one bridge had been built that it would be swept away by the first spring floodwaters. We pointed out to the construction chief that this was the result of hurrying to build the bridge ahead of schedule, so that the commission would go back to Moscow with a rosy impression and pictures of the train crossing it. "Don't worry," the chief inspector said, and ordered the commander to put 100 men on both banks and begin strengthening work. But they had nothing to strengthen the supports with. The stone they planned to use was still in transit. But the order had been given and the commander had said the job would be done.
Эта дорога была на костях, в никуда, и совершенно естественно она саморазрушилась. Ее даже, если бы ее потом технически грамотно бы содержали, допустим, ее бы достроили, допустим, она бы функционировала, она изначально была обречена. Вот в чем эти человеческие жизни отданы были напрасно. Изначально дорога была обречена, изначально. То есть люди погибали зря. Вот эта дорога воистину на костях, зря, эти жизни человеческие были отданы совершенно зря.
As the Arctic winter approached, the struggle to survive intensified.
Холодно было, когда вот сильные ветра было, там прошибало насквозь. Вот и ватник, и бушлаты, все стоишь как голый, замерзаешь. Надо только движение спасало, больше ничто не спасало, там, когда ветер в пургу. Забирались на чердак этого дома под крышу и старался каждый попасть в серединку, чтобы подольше полежать. Поворачиваться по команде, ложились плотнее друг к другу, там, телогреечку под низ, что-то сверху сообща. И плотнее друг к другу, чтобы ночью были холодные.
A stranger would lie down next to me on my bunk and nestle against my bony shoulder in the night, giving me his pitiful warmth and receiving my own in exchange. There were nights when no warmth at all penetrated the rags of my pea jacket and padded vest. And in the morning I would think my neighbor was dead, and be surprised that he would rise in response to a shouted command, get dressed and submissively obey the order.
Закон первый лагерный: имей возможность, имей мужество, следи за собой, сохраняй тепло. Даже не дыши вот так. Вот закрылся где-то, прикурнул, дыши туда. Дыши туда, чтобы самому себя хотя бы согреть. Вот это мелочи, то даже, понимаете, само дыхание даже имеет большое и очень большое значение. И говорят так: то, что сегодня, что не оставляй на завтра того, что можешь съесть сегодня. Это закон лагерный.
One New Year's Eve, the guards were celebrating, drinking and laughing all night. Their lights were ingeniously powered by a simple dynamo. In an outer shed, 6 prisoners sat in freezing temperatures and pedalled away on bicycles rigged up to the turbine. As the festivities waned, one of the guards, carried away by the spirit of the evening, gave the bicycle crew some of the pure alcohol the guards were drinking. Given the iron law of the camp, that fortune must be seized at once, for anything once given could just as easily be taken away, the exhausted prisoners drank it straight down. Gradually, the light dimmed and then went out. In the morning, when the guards finally awoke, they found all 6 prisoners slumped on the bicycles, frozen solid.
Там заворачивали в простынь, на ногу бирку, запрягаешь в сани, 6 человек, и везешь. Через варку проводишь, прокалывает, чтобы живой не попался. А там кто его будет зимой яму копать? Кто? В силах, что ли? Нет. Нет. Назад потом, когда приезжаешь, тебе спиртика дадут 25 грамм.
For years, they have force-fed us with a web of deceit. They tell us the planet is round. Them folks over in Australia do not hang with their feet. See, the Earth is flat. And now they expect us to believe that this is lager. Lager? It's smooth. Lager's not smooth.
It's got a creamy head.
It takes a long time to settle. Lager should not do this.
Not round, not lager. Not round, not lager.
Electricity can kill. Watch out for overhead power lines.
older Denny has disappeared. Again.
Denny Rasher's sausages and pudding taste so good, they're bound to disappear. Denny, made to disappear.
The manager continues to enjoy the complete confidence of the City Board.
When circumstances change, Rover commitment comes into play, because only with Rover dealers, if you return your new Rover within 30 days or 1,000 miles, you can have a full refund. Or alternatively,
one more shot.
you can swap it.
Listen, you must be my boy. It's a strike here, mate.
For something more suitable.
For car glass, automatically think autoglass.
Beware, your skin can be sensitive. Some soaps and shower gels can irritate your skin, but Garnier Neutralia Derma Protection Shower Gel is pure, with no harsh additives, soap-free, hypoallergenic, and it's enriched with moisturizers to leave your skin feeling softer, more supple, healthier. Garnier Neutralia Derma Protection Shower Gel, formulated and controlled by Laboratoire Garnier, Paris.
By 1951, it had become clear that the great Stalin railway project would not be up and running on schedule. But Stalin's order stood. The eastern and western ends of the line were still more than 500 miles apart. No section of the track that had been built could safely support the weight of a loaded train. And when the locomotives did run, their maximum speed was limited to a mere 10 miles per hour. The coming winter was to be one of the coldest for years.
We could determine the weather precisely without a thermometer. If there was a frosty fog, that meant the temperature outside was 40 degrees below zero. If you exhaled easily, but in a rasping fashion, it was 50 degrees below zero. If there was a rasping and it was difficult to breathe, it was 60 degrees below. After 60 degrees below zero, spit froze in midair.
Как-то раз приходилось, работали мы, долбили какую-то траншею во льду. По-моему, кабель нужно было опустить на дно. И была такая метель, что мы вынуждены были прятаться в эту траншею. Там в лед, на лед ложились, и хоть немножко там в себя прийти, согреться. А на ветру все, не спасала никакая одежда. Было очень холодно. А в основном старались согреваться только работой. Чем лучше, веселее шевелишься, больше двигаешься. Движение это было, кажется, спасение от всех бед. Это... У кого была сила, тот старался шевелиться. А кто изнемогал, с теми сложнее. Было и такое.
Ну вот был такой начальник надзорслужбы у нас, это старший надзиратель, значит. Это просто человек, ненавистный, ему нравилось. Вот зима, мороз, 40 градусов. Приходит человек из лесу. Что он может с собой принести? Нет, давай, а ну, раздевайся, а ну, где? А ну, давай рог поднимай. До самого, понимаете, голову раздени, 40 градусов мороз. Что я могу оттуда принести? Полено дров, что ли? Ну чё? Иди. Смотришь, через 3-4 человека постоит, замерзнет, холодно ему опять кого-нибудь. А ну-ка, давай, раздевай. Это уже у человека патология. Это болезненный человек, это больной человек. Вот и такие больные тоже бывали. Разные люди. Ужасно.
The same frost that transformed a man's spit into ice in mid-air also penetrated the soul. If bones could freeze, then the brain could also be dulled and the soul could freeze over. And when the soul shuddered and froze, perhaps to remain frozen forever, a man lost everything except the desire to survive, to endure the cold and remain alive. The high mortality rate and the primitive conditions of the camp made it difficult for the guards to keep a careful check on prisoners. Frozen bodies were sometimes concealed in the shacks, while the other prisoners would continue to collect their rations of bread and soup.
И там помойка. Туда выбрасывают все отходы. И там всегда вокруг нее дистрофики, эти самые из лазарета, и просто дистрофики, роются в этой помойке и кусочки для себя выбирают, тут же их жадно съедают. И тут я увидел, что на помойке лежит человек, труп, старик какой-то. Но это мешок с костями. У него на шее шнурок и пустой мешочек. Ну, здесь из этих дистрофиков сказали, что это из лазарета дистрофик, который уже в разряд пелагриков переходил. А у него здесь в мешочке было 3 рубля. Это была его заначка. Он носил ее на груди. Кто-то узнал про эти 3 рубля, и у него перерезано горло. Но у него можно было взять просто так, отнять, отобрать. Он же совершенно беспомощен. Но это не по-лагерному. По-лагерному вот зарезали и взяли. Вот это жестокость, и это опять-таки вот цена жизни, которой 3 рубля.
Нервный парнишка, несмотря никаких у него отклонений, совершенно незаметно было. Игорь Лоскутов, бывший военнослужащий, служил в русском воинском отряде, парень довольно здоровый. И один раз вечерняя поверка, вечером одного не хватает. Что такое вечером? Туда-сюда, везде. А уйти невозможно, потому что эта зона загорожена еще раз в зоне. Никуда никто не вышел, значит, где-то тут. Искали, ночью не нашли. Под утро, значит, только нашли. Он залез, бедный, на чердак, разрисовал углем, уголь древесный. Там трубы, они побелены и звездкой белой. Он везде антисоветские лозунги расписал. Палач Сталин, долой коммунизм, значит, все это расписал. Кресты кругом. разрисовал. Сел и сидит. Никакого впечатления. Зашли на крышу, то сюда стали хватать. Значит, сидит как окаменевший.
Не забывайте принесенных вами жертв.
Можно мне вас поцеловать, товарищ Сталин? За все! За все, что вы сделали для нашего народа! Для нас!
Я не думал, что выживу. Вообще-то думал, быстрее бы это закончилось. К одному концу. Ну, если бы не был трусом, то я бы, наверное, кинулся бы на эту колючую проволоку, пусть стреляет с пулемета. А я трус. Трус. Только поэтому выжил.
Последний раз, когда вот какой-то врачи вот появились, что уже чуть ли не падая, так поместили вот в эту больницу, там, сколько я, недели 3 или 4 был, я не помню, конечно. Это немножко поддержало. Тем более стараешься каким-то образом где-то что-то попасть. В больнице раз мог шевелиться, попала возможность, я устроился на кухню, там воду носить, да дрова, печки топить, чтобы подкормиться маленько, окрепнуть. Это выручило хорошо. Все-таки там попадало больше. Так. Трудно вспоминать все это.
Человек теряет свои человеческие качества и понемножку превращается в голодное, усталое, истерзанное животное. И, конечно, при этом у него не остается у большинства тех идеалов, в которых он где-то, когда-то дома был воспитан. А здесь действовал один принцип лагерный. Умри сегодня ты, а я завтра. И ради того, чтобы умереть не сегодня, а завтра, конечно, в общем-то, люди шли на многое. Я считаю, что за 8 лет пребывания в лагере у меня есть один поступок, которого я никогда уже за последующие 40 после освобождения я не забывал. Это когда я был в лазарете и ухаживал за этими доходягами, за этими дистрофиками, я однажды у находящегося в беспамятстве уже обреченного, он уже, Пелагрик был такой, обреченный на смерть, я у него взял пайку и съел ее. И этого я не мог простить себе всю остальную жизнь. Думаю, что с этим я и уйду. С чувством вины перед умирающим человеком. Хотя был он обречен даже, как и я. Но тут вступал в силу: сегодня умри ты, а я потом.
Ко всем трудящимся Советского Союза. Центральный комитет Коммунистической партии Советского Союза с чувством великой скорби извещает партию и всех трудящихся Советского Союза, что 5 марта в 9 часов 50 минут вечера после тяжелой болезни скончался Иосиф Виссарионович Сталин. Перестало биться сердце соратника и гениального продолжателя дела Ленина, мудрого вождя и учителя коммунистической партии и советского народа Иосифа Виссарионовича Сталина.
Если бы сказали, что Сталину угрожает опасность, или летел бы в Сталина пулю, я бы свою грудь бы подставил. А здесь я вроде против него, против государства. Да никогда этого не было. Это я сейчас только узнал, что делали, что это умышленно. Это умышленное уничтожение собственного народа.
Охваченные глубокой скорбью, тысячи москвичей вышли в это утро на Красную площадь.
Понимаете, я возненавидел этого Сталина, я бы его сейчас бы откопал, бы его все кости бы переломал.
Глубокая печаль пришла в семьи советских людей. Пришла скорбная весть и на далекое Заполярье.
Иосиф Сталин был для нас ведь действительно кумиром. И те, кто сейчас говорят, что вот, я всегда считал, я понимал, я думал, неправда. Самые светлые умы тех лет верили Сталину и сталинизму и готовы были отдать кровь. И когда Сталин умер, огромное большинство людей и у нас в лагере были выбиты из колеи, обескуражены. Многие понимали, что, а ведь кажется, он палач. Но в то же время привычный облик этого полубога, получеловека, он не давал судить его. И когда я ревел, я рыдал, стоя у притолоки барака, я бился головой об эту притолоку и плакал от того, что умер Сталин. И я не представлял себе, как мы будем дальше жить без Сталина.
Сколько миллионов там погибло. А если не погибло, мучилось, это какие мучения? Страшные мучения. Это искалечение душ, искалечение тел, искалечение жизни, искалечение биографий, искалечение семей, искалечение интересов. В конце концов, искалечение, понимаете, гениев. Были же гениальные, нормальные люди. Не будем говорить нормальные, неправильно я сказал. Одаренные люди, которые могли бы миру принести что-то. Увы, их нет.
On March the 25th, 1953, 20 days after Stalin's death, the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union ordered that the Great Stalin Railway project be abandoned. The prisoners were put to work for months afterwards, ripping up the track in an effort to recover as many iron rails as possible. There are no official figures for the number of men who died. Unofficial estimates vary from 60,000 to over 100,000 prisoners. By the end, about 500 miles of track had been laid. One sleeper for every corpse.
That was the last programme in the current series, but True Stories returns to 4 next year.
It's very likely that Joseph Stalin was the biggest mass murderer in history. Historians, of course, find this fascinating. No new book can come out on Stalin, whether its author is left-wing or right-wing, capitalist or communist, that can resist the temptation of increasing the estimate of the number of people he had killed. How many might that be? Well, leaving aside a few famines that he caused and his blunders in the Second World War, which are held to be too indirect to count, and concentrating only on those who died as a result of his direct orders, the grand total is said to be 22 million people. One might suppose that slaughter on such a scale would have settled the question of Stalin's villainy forever. But that's very far from being the case. People have always been oddly keen to believe the best of him, even when he wasn't at the height of his power. When he was top dog in Russia, the degree to which the cult of his personality shone exceeded anything that's ever been seen before or since. No Roman emperor received the kind of public plaudits that Stalin did, or even his contemporary Adolf Hitler, or later Chairman Mao. Hitler and Mao were lauded as the creators of their society. Stalin was praised as the man who'd not only saved Russia, but the whole world. When a scientific discovery was made in Russia, the publicity surrounding it always implied that the original idea for the research had come from Stalin. When a Soviet chess player won a foreign tournament, he at once sent a letter to the immortal leader thanking him for creating a climate in which Russian chess players could think up brilliant moves. If this all seems ludicrous and servile, there's worse. Stalin was once invoked as our father by a metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church. It would be possible to dismiss all of this as inevitable in a society where a startlingly high number of the working population belonged to the secret police, were it not for the fact that the same kind of extravagances were commonplace outside Russia. A large part of the Western intelligentsia, most of them not communists, fell over each other to heap praise on Stalin's head. The number of statements made about him are so incredible that I'll select just a couple to give you a flavour of what it was like. Lillian Hellman, a famous playwright and motion picture screenwriter, said in the 1930s, and I quote, Stalin has abolished injustice and exploitation in Russia and is well on the way to ending selfishness. Charlie Chaplin, who played Adolf Hitler in the film The Great Dictator and was researching a film about Napoleon Bonaparte, was asked if he'd like to portray Stalin. Very solemnly, the great comedian replied, "It's hard to play a man who has no failings." If we move on from those who saw the true beauty of Stalin's personality to those who saw things in the physical world that weren't there, we can take the case of George Bernard Shaw. Shaw went to Russia at the time of a terrible famine in the Ukraine, which Stalin had contrived in order to punish the peasantry. It was so bad that Stalin's own secret police were taking photographs of the corpses lying on the pavements in the Ukrainian towns. And what did Shaw see? When he got back, he said, "There's plenty of food in Russia. Nobody goes hungry." Beatrice and Sidney Webb, the founders of the Fabian Society, managed to see things on their visit to Russia even more extraordinary than the abundance that Shaw had noticed. They were very keen on Stalin's 1936 constitution, which they said gave the Russian people great democratic rights, security under the law, and more freedom than was enjoyed anywhere else. They managed to see this just before the very height of Stalin's terror. What somehow they failed to notice were the false imprisonments, the total absence of free speech, and the mass murders. Stalin's Western friends called him Uncle Joe, and there was much discussion of his kindness and peasant wisdom. Stalin's grip on the imagination and affection of many of the Western intelligentsia is a remarkable story, and it poses a crucial question. How on earth did this terrible tyrant manage to evoke such love from his devotees? Stalin was the revolutionary name of Joseph Jurashvili, a Georgian, not a Russian, born in 1879, the son of a drunken cobbler who beat him as a child, and a downtrodden peasant mother whose dearest hope was that he would become a priest. He nearly died of smallpox at the age of 5 and was permanently facially disfigured as a result of the disease, but he survived. And then he fulfilled his mother's hopes by getting into a seminary. He was an intelligent student, but totally undisciplined, so he was expelled. His reading of Karl Marx and his temperament then took him into the career that really suited him, that of a professional revolutionary. Stalin joined the party that Lenin had founded, the Bolshevik Party, which later changed its name to the Communist Party. It wasn't a political party as we in Britain understand that term. It was a conspiracy against the state, a conspiracy of professional revolutionaries who took all the risks and made all the decisions. Stalin loved the life. He began his career in the city of Tiflis, doing some useful, dirty work for the party, including bank robberies. At first he called himself Koba, but he then changed his name to Stalin, which means man of steel. Though he did have periods of exile in Siberia, he enjoyed the life, and it gave him status because he gradually rose in the Bolshevik hierarchy. After the October Revolution of 1917, Lenin made him Commissar for Nationalities. But his really vital promotion came in 1922 when he was made General Secretary of the Central Committee of the party. It was from that post that he rose to absolute power. Stalin spotted much more quickly than the intellectuals in the Politburo, like Trotsky, that the Communist Party was going to be dominated by its bureaucracy. The very nature of a communist society requires the constant supervision of practically everything, because everything is regarded as political. Gradually it became apparent that Stalin was Lenin's natural successor. He knew how to handle bureaucrats, and he didn't frighten anybody. With hindsight, that seems an astonishing misjudgment on the part of his colleagues. But until he got to supreme power in the Politburo, Stalin wasn't thought of as a ruthless power seeker. His reputation was as a team player. He was very jovial and very sociable. He told a lot of jokes. He danced a lot. He drank a lot. He was always eager to join in on a sing-song. He was everybody's friend. This bonhomie, by the way, genuinely was a part of his real character. So much so that he could use it not only to impress Russian communists, but also the great British public, especially during the Second World War. But these personal characteristics weren't the real reason for Stalin's popularity in certain circles. What was truly noteworthy about him was his commitment to an idea. It wasn't his idea. He'd taken the idea of communism in Russia fully fledged from Lenin, and he never denied the fact. Even at the very height of his power, he swore allegiance to the heritage of Lenin. But with the tenacity of a peasant, and perhaps more thoroughly than any intellectual could, Stalin supported the basic idea behind communism that's proved so attractive to so many people in so many different places. The idea of a better society created by collective effort. Stalin believed in that, and because he was a man of action rather than a thinker, a lot of people, Russians and foreigners, thought that he was the chap who could deliver on this promise, not just philosophize about it. They weren't entirely mistaken in that respect. Stalin was prepared to do whatever was necessary to create socialism, whatever was necessary. Unfortunately, as we found out in this century to our cost, pursuit of the joys of socialism, the tantalizing joys of socialism, exacts a toll. In order to produce a fair outcome, the state has to devise a system that confines everybody. Necessarily, that's a less productive system than one where people are pursuing their own personal advantage and their own personal gain. And even the outcome can be challenged as not fair, but inevitably the state will demand conformity from everybody, even if they find it intrusive and offensive. Dissent won't be tolerated, resistance will be crushed. It fell to Stalin to impose this model on a country 6,000 miles across, most of it primitive and remote, but nourishing fierce passions which had recently involved a civil war. Of course, a lot of eggs were going to be broken to make this omelette. Stalin's first step was a courageous intellectual decision. He told the Communist Party and its organizers that the Russians could expect no help for socialism from outside. This was important. A lot of people had always believed the doctrine. Sometimes it was in the forefront of their minds, it was always in the back of their minds, the back of the minds of rigid Marxists, that Russia was too primitive to produce socialism. It needed the support of a state or a series of states with more industrial workers and a more bourgeois economy. The country on which so many false hopes were placed was Germany. Stalin wasn't having any of that. He thought that refusing to be in the vanguard of socialism was psychologically depressing for Russia. And it also went a long way to justifying Lenin's quasi-capitalist so-called new economic policy. Lenin had adopted that policy in despair, but in plain truth it had worked really rather well. But of course, it was nothing like Stalin's idea of socialism. So he announced a new doctrine of socialism in one country, that country being the Soviet Union, and he began a headlong rush for industrialization. The motive behind the feverish activity that Stalin wanted was essentially defensive. His fear was that if socialism was economically unsuccessful, it would be beaten by the greater attractions of capitalism. At the time, a lot of people thought that that was a very, very foolish worry, but as it turns out, Stalin was right. So he declaimed that socialism must rush past capitalism, and to do that, he devised the 5-year plans. Now, there was a lot about these 5-year plans that was bogus. All the statistics were faked because the state couldn't admit any failures. and all the norms had to be over-fulfilled well ahead of time so that the plan could be announced to be a great success. Yet despite the trickery, there's no doubt that it did give a tremendous impulse to Soviet industrialization. And I find it difficult to believe that the Soviets could have fought the Nazis off in the 1940s if it hadn't have been for this Stalinist industrialization. Of course, the human cost was great, but that pales into insignificance in comparison with the human cost of the forced collectivization of agriculture. Stalin didn't believe that you could have a proper socialist system if you had an agricultural private sector. Unfortunately, state enterprises in agriculture have never worked particularly well in any country at any time. But Stalin didn't seem to care about that. 25 million peasant households were forced into collective farms within a few years. The peasants fiercely resisted the new system, but nobody in the Soviet Union ever defied Stalin successfully. He denounced his peasant enemies as kulaks, witch peasants, and he turned on some of them, his troops, and heavily armed units of the secret police. Those who weren't killed in the first assault were subsequently shot or sent to the Gulag, the concentration camps. The deaths and the suffering were on an epic scale. Now, if Stalin had intended to produce an efficient Soviet agriculture, one would have to say that the whole project was a disastrous failure because Soviet agriculture became legendary for its gross inefficiency. But producing abundance wasn't Stalin's motive at all. He wanted to impose socialism on a politically recalcitrant peasantry. He wanted to break their spirit. And looked at from that point of view, the collectivization of agriculture is one of Stalin's most durable achievements. After they'd received the full Stalinist treatment, not a squeak of protest was heard from the peasantry again. We can very rightly shake our head at the horror of it all. But the Iron Man in the Kremlin didn't lose a wink of sleep about having removed another obstacle to socialism. By the mid-1930s, Stalin's colleagues had cottoned on to the fact that instead of having at their head a mediocre, good-natured non-entity, they had got on their hands a socialist dictator. The loss of life he caused was staggering. But the Communist Party had got used to the hideous excitements of the time, and there were consolations. At least they were safe as communists. Not even Lenin had dared to raise his hand against the party. But that was another misjudgment. What they forgot is that Lenin had created the apparatus of terror, which in another hand could be used in a way that perhaps he wouldn't have used it. Lenin had set up the secret police. He'd told them who to murder. Lenin believed in terror. All leading communists did. There were no merciful innocents in their ranks, but they weren't as thorough as Stalin. They thought they were safe because they were in the Communist Party. But Stalin suspected lots of people in the Communist Party, and industrial managers, and the officer class in the army, and even leading figures in the secret police. He thought they might stand between him and his dream of personal authority over socialism. So to universal astonishment, he ordered a purge of the Communist Party. It was no token affair. It was a thorough cleansing of the hives which exterminated the old Bolsheviks. Most of Lenin's old Politburo, many of the senior leaders of the Communist Party, much of the middle rank received a bullet in the back of the neck. And it wasn't just civilian communists. Of the 85 officers in the Army Military Council, 68 were shot, and most of the other 17 were sent to the Gulag. 1937 and 1938 were the crescendo of this bloodbath, though it's wrong to think that there were any peaceful years, because the terror went on all the time. Stalin's extermination on that scale of his own colleagues is quite unparalleled in history. And it was made even more bizarre by his show trials. Stalin liked confessions, and his communist prisoners, either to save their own lives, a false hope, or more creditably, because of fears about their families, gave him the confessions that he wanted. They didn't just confess to plotting with Trotsky and the other exiles to murder Stalin. They hadn't done that either, by the way. But they didn't confess to it. That was thought to be too tame. These lifelong Marxist revolutionaries confessed to working for the Nazis, or even more incredibly, for the Japanese Secret Service. This rubbish was read out in court and solemnly believed by Stalin's friends throughout the world. It's much easier to understand Stalin than it is to understand those who excused him. He wanted to create a socialist system under his personal dictatorship. What on earth did they think they were doing? Well, for his Russian supporters, one can have a certain sympathy. One of the things that the 5-year plans had revealed was the passionate patriotism, fanaticism of Russian youth. The Russian workforce became in the end so indifferent and apathetic and cynical that we tend to forget that there was a time when many people in Russia believed in communism, especially the young. They were easy prey for Stalin's propaganda. They were idealists, prepared to give their lives to build socialism. And they did in very considerable numbers. But what are we to say of the people whom Lenin once described as useful idiots, the foreigners living in democracies who nevertheless supported Stalin's Soviet system? What are we to say about them? They appear to have divided into two main categories. The first justified Stalin's means by reference to his ends. Professor Haldane said he has to be brutal to save the world. That kind of argument, by the way, was greatly assisted by the intellectual climate of the time. Political debate went on in an atmosphere of religious frenzy. To be calm and dispassionate was the great crime. Everybody was supposed to pick a side and support it to the hilt. The other group of Stalin's apologists didn't excuse his crime. They didn't recognize that it had happened. He weeps for the children, Beatrice Webb told an astonished acquaintance. And there were lots of similar statements. Whole conferences were held in which groups of people got up and explained about the terrible treachery that Stalin had faced from his colleagues, of the wonderful things that he had done in the Soviet Union. No reference was made to any crime or indeed fault on Stalin's part. It's an extraordinary story, but it's true. Those, then, are the real reasons why the greatest criminal and possibly the biggest mass murderer in history are so often let off the hook. people are inclined, if the cause is sufficiently seductive, to find excuses for the cause that they support. Or they turn a complete blind eye to it. Stalin was indeed a villain, but he wasn't the only villain in his story. His apologists were villains too, and perhaps of an even more dangerous kind. Because to apologize for evil, or to turn a blind eye to it, is the very encouragement that people like Stalin and political leaders of that stripe need. You see, the great crimes of history, as this series, I hope, has shown, are not simply caused by one evil monster. Nearly always, he doesn't bear the sole responsibility for what's happened. Yes, he's planned it. Yes, he carries it through with very great brutality. But he relies, to a very large extent, on the collusion of perfectly ordinary people who should have known better but didn't. Now, that's the real lesson that we can draw from Stalin. And in my opinion, it's the real lesson we can draw from the whole story of villainy. It is not the grotesque activity of a single individual or even a group of grotesque individuals. It comes about because of the apathy, the indifference, the triviality, the lack of attention of people like us. And its antidote is attentive citizenship. After this program, I'll be answering questions about the series live on the internet.